mean, voters have to swear.
I'm here at Dominican University in San Rafael, California, for the second annual Public Banking Institute conference. I had an opportunity to talk to some of the key speakers. So I'm here with Ellen Brown, who's the chairman and the president of the Public Banking Institute, the entity that's putting on this second annual conference on public banking. Ellen, real briefly, tell us what public banking is and why do we need it?
Public banking is either local, state, or federally owned banks. So we, the people, would own the bank. We would own the ability to create credit for our local community. We only have one public bank of the type that we talk about in the Public Banking Institute, which is a depository bank, and that's in the state of North Dakota, the Bank of North Dakota. North Dakota is also the only state that escaped the credit crisis. They have the lowest foreclosure rate in the country, the lowest default rate, the lowest unemployment rate, and the most local banks per capita. So the Bank of North Dakota serves as a mini Fed for the state. So instead of giving away your revenues to Wall Street to leverage and however they feel like using for their own purposes, you keep your revenues in the state and use it for your own local purposes. But now we have another reason, and that's safety. Now that this bail-in policy has come down, our state revenues that are in Wall Street banks could get confiscated. Now I have a new book out called, or just about out, called The Public Bank Solution, and it's where I've looked at models globally and historically, and it turns out that 40% of banks globally are publicly owned, and that these are largely in the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, which also all escaped the credit crisis. And the key to their success seems to be that they have a very strong public banking sector.
Now, would you also advocate that the Fed be nationalized and publicly owned, and why?
Yeah, you can't really get rid of the Fed. You need a central exchange mechanism. I mean, the Fed performs many important functions, but right now it's basically controlled by private banks. It's definitely not controlled by the government. They may have it may be the president that appoints, the Federal Reserve Board, but the president and Congress. But as Alan Greenspan said when he was asked about his relationship with President Clinton, he said, well, that the chairman of the Federal Reserve answers to no one. In other words, they're independent of government, but they're not really independent because they answer to all those big banks that make up the boards of the 12 Federal Reserve branches.
So do you think that if it was federally owned or nationalized, that it would be pursuing, as some of the speakers said here today, fiscal policy to solve our problems as opposed to monetary policy?
Well, what they would have to do is actually change the wording of the Federal Reserve Act to allow them to lend, for example, to students. So that's what Elizabeth Warren is attempting to do, is actually change the law to allow the Federal Reserve to open its window to students at 0.75%, the same percentage that they're offering to banks. But it certainly could be done. It's only a question of legislation. And yes, it should be done.
So I'm here with David Cobb from Move to Amend. David, what brings you to the Public Banking Conference?
Well, of course, public banking is a common sense solution that anybody supports as soon as you understand that it allows public infrastructure projects to be financed with zero interest because it's public money. It's a common sense solution, but it's not being implemented because we, the people, don't control our own government. The point is this. Public banking is an example of what economic democracy would look like, but we can't implement economic democracy because we don't have political democracy, and we don't have political democracy because we don't have economic democracy. To me, Lauren, these are absolutely integrated ideas. Move to Amend and public banking are two sides of the same coin.
Hey, I'm here with Taibbi, who needs no introduction. Okay, so Matt, you mentioned that these shenanigans happened right under our noses because they were too complicated for most people to understand. But the thesis of winner-take-all politics, how Washington made the rich richer and turned its back on the middle class, was that people knew full well what was going on, but because of the lobbyists and because of the campaign contributions, they made a conscious decision to support the big banks and the corporations. Do you think the situation will change unless we put brakes on the lobbyists and we do something about campaign finance reform, including a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United?
Yeah, I don't see significant change happening unless they do something about the influence of money. I mean, that's the primary advantage of the financial services sector, is that they're a cash-rich business, and politics is a cash game. So the reason oftentimes that politicians listen to Wall Street, even when the polls don't go with them, is because it's a single source of cash that they can go to. They don't have to work to get gazillions of contributions from lots of other people. They can just go to one. It's one-stop shopping for them. So unless you can fix that inequity, I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of significant changes.
What can the members of the public do to try to do something to reduce the large the degree to which financial services have a hold of our economy?
I mean, this public banking idea is one thing. You got to vote for politicians like Elizabeth Warren. You got to take your money out of big banks. You got to try to elect district attorneys who will be willing to pursue criminal and civil cases against financial criminals. Because the two main avenues of change are legislation and settlements. So as much as people want to talk about getting on the streets and organizing, it really does still come down to electing the right people and supporting the right politicians and getting them into office.
And what's happening with Schneiderman?
Schneiderman is doing a few things. He's got a couple of suits that he's filed, civil suits, but they're still not. I think the idea that he was given this enormous freewheeling mandate to go after all of Wall Street, I think that was an unrealistic expectation.
You talked about the collateral damages of that theory that Eric Holder put forward, but that wouldn't come into play if they just picked one high-level executive, say Jamie Dimon, and make him do a perp walk outside of 740 Park Avenue.
Right.
Don't you think if they did something like that, all this would stop?
I do think that if they did a couple of high-level investigations, that would be valuable. Look, if they had done that in the third week of September 2008, that might have caused an international crisis if they had gone after a whole bunch of big bank executives and CEOs. But it's 5 years after the crisis now. There's no logical reason not to go after individuals, and they have to do it. They have to send some of these guys to jail because there's no disincentive otherwise. In fact, I had somebody tell me that if they sent Lloyd Blankfein to prison for 6 months, that all of this would end.
Exactly. Now, do you think that Elizabeth Warren, with her crusade, she's been grilling the regulators pretty hard about why they haven't pursued any trials? She's done this wonderful bill with the student loans. Do you think that she can get any leverage, get anyone to follow her, or is she just going to be a lone voice like Bernie Sanders?
No, I mean there's a bunch of people in the Senate who are kind of hitting the same note. Sherrod Brown, Jeff Merkley, Carl Levin, Sanders, even who am I thinking of? The guy from Louisiana, the Vitter, a Republican, Grassley. I mean, and it's. The original idea to break up the banks, the Brown-Kaufman Amendment, that lost, 60 to something to 30 something.
Presumably because Obama didn't support it. I remember reading about that in Fire Dog Lake.
But I think they're about 10 votes closer now. I think a lot of the stuff that's happened in the intervening time has convinced a lot of members, even the Republican members, that they got to do something. And I think it's weirdly enough, it's just patriotism. It's just, we just got to do it. Otherwise we're in trouble.
So I'm here with Jim Sauber, who's the Chief of Staff of the National Association of Letter Carriers. Tell us really briefly what's happening to the post office and why, really briefly.
Well, the Postal Service is facing a financial crisis that's largely manufactured in Congress. In 2006, they passed a law that put huge burdens on the Postal Service to pre-fund tens of billions of dollars of retiree health payments for the future over a 10-year period. So it's caused that, combined with the Great Recession and obviously some structural problems with mail being diverted through the internet, has created a perfect storm for the Postal Service. So they've recorded losses of about $40 billion over the last 7 years, and almost all of it is due to this pre-funding mandate. And so what we're trying to do is fight for reform that will repeal that mandate and structure the Postal Service for the 21st century.
Why are you here at the Public Banking Conference?
Well, one of the options that we want, rather than dismantle our networks and close post offices, we want to find new uses for them. And in many parts of the country, banks have left. They've left a good chunk of the rural America unserved. Lots of inner city, low-income areas don't have banks, and the Postal Service could serve as a niche product and provide low-cost banking services to American citizens.
Can you speak to the remittances?
Well, remittance service is something the Postal Service actually already does. We have a limited service geared towards Latin America that serves 9 countries, and it's a low-cost service. It costs about a third of what a typical private remittance service costs, and it's very convenient because there are post offices literally all over the world. And we'd like to expand that, make it a universal service that would reach, potentially all 660,000 post offices all over the world.
Okay, so I know how many post offices have been closed and how many are they trying to close?
Well, so far it's a limited number that have been closed, 2,500 to 3,500. But worse in some ways is they're cutting hours in about 12,000 different post offices out of our total of 32,000. So this is a shame. This is a service that we should make as convenient as possible for Americans to access, and we would like to find ways to prevent further degradation of our services to the public.
What is your chances of success, do you think?
Well, it's tough. I mean, what we have going for us is the country supports the Postal Service. In public opinion polls, well over 80% of Americans have a favorable view of the Postal Service. I think they value it. And I think they'd like it to see it strengthened and preserved.
So I'm with J.B. Wagoner, who's with Occupy the Bank.
Yes, bankofOccupy.org, and also Occupy Orange County, and whatever other Occupies there are out there.
What are you working on?
Initially we're working on a Bank of Occupy, but just to do a bank would be like getting a franchise of the Federal Reserve, which really doesn't get us any closer to our goals of economic and social justice. We looked also at doing a credit union, but they're disadvantaged by the banks, not being able to create money. So we're here at this conference this weekend, to try to learn more about public banking and maybe other methods we can do this, get it to the city or the county or the state.
I'm here with Arthur Stamoulis, who's head of the Citizens Trade Campaign. Arthur, tell us about the Trans-Pacific Partnership and why should we be very afraid?
Yeah, so the Trans-Pacific Partnership is a corporate power grab disguised as a trade deal. This is a pact that's going to set the rules governing the global economy now for 12 countries throughout the Pacific Rim. That's 40% of the global economy, with the potential to get even bigger through its docking mechanisms. And different corporate interest groups have a lot of different dogs in this fight. So Big Pharma wants to use it to expand the length of their monopoly drug patents. The retailers want to use it to further the race to the bottom in wages and working conditions. The big ag and the so-called life sciences companies want to limit food safety standards and consumer right to know. And then of course we have Wall Street. And Wall Street wants to use the TPP to force all sorts of financial deregulation, blocking regulations against too big to fail, prohibiting bans on the sale of toxic derivatives, prohibiting firewalls being implemented between different types of financial service providers, like with the reinstatement of the Depression-era Glass-Steagall Act. And then also there's a lot of concern about capital controls, which a lot of countries have used very successfully to limit the spread of financial crises by regulating hot money flows into and out of countries. Specific to the public banking conference and the community here doing such great work, the TPP potentially threatens public banks in a couple ways. One of the underlying themes in the TPP and many of our trade policies is this idea of national treatment or non-discrimination, that basically any sort of foreign investor needs to be treated as well, not only as domestic businesses, but oftentimes as public service providers. And so theoretically, depending on how it's written, the TPP could require that any sorts of tax breaks, financing guarantees, other special benefits that public banks get on behalf of the government need to apply as well to their private sector competitors, i.e. the Wall Street banks and insurance companies and hedge funds. The flip side of that same coin is that any sorts of preferential financing or special programs that public banks create for local businesses, domestic citizens, they may be required to provide for foreign corporations as well, the big transnationals. And so we're here to sound the alarm about the TPP. And, I think the two messages I really want to share with people interested in public banking is, number one, don't let the TPP or any trade agreement block you from doing what you want to do and putting the programs in place. It's not our job to say that a policy is going to be undermined by a trade agreement. Let the corporations argue that. We got to push forward what needs to be done. And the second thing is that we can win. Public movements, grassroots movements throughout the world have time and time again defeated corporate power grabs like the TPP, be it the WTO, be it the Free Trade Area of the Americas, be it the Multilateral Agreement on Investment, you name it. And we're going to win again. We just need people's help.
So I'm here with Gar Alperovitz, who wrote Beyond Capitalism, and your new book is?
What Then Must We Do?
Exactly. So what then must we do?
Well, I think we're in a period when we can begin laying the foundations for a potentially great transformation. And I say that not lightly. I think American corporate capitalism is in a complex and unusual crisis, a sustainable, long-term decaying crisis of both the ecological and economic and social, but not a collapse. And I think that's a plus, because if it were to collapse, we'd get a crisis response probably to the right. A slow developmental period under great duress allows people to develop democratic options, and that's what's really not being covered by the press. There are literally thousands of cooperatives around the country, many new ones, many older. There are 10 million people involved in worker-owned companies. The press doesn't cover much of this. There are 130 million Americans involved in one or another form of cooperative, including the credit unions, which are one-person, one-vote banks. And there is an emergence because of the pain levels, I think, that are beginning to crystallize the basis of a potential larger move forward that might build a democratic economy. So this is a very important period of time. I think it's one of the most important, potentially one of the most important periods of American history.
I'm here with Kevin Zeese, who everyone knows from starting October 2011, which sort of morphed into or worked alongside Occupy Washington, D.C. And now I'm going to ask him about the new organization that he and Margaret Flowers started called PopularResistance.org.
Well, Popular Resistance is more than Margaret and I. If you look at the page about us, you'll see there's about 60 people who've already signed on to be contributors to it. So it's not just a two-person effort. And what it is an effort to bring movements together with a broad common vision of ending the rule of money and making sure that the people and planet come before corporate profits. And that really covers almost every issue. And then we put forward a strategic framework that runs on two tracks. It's a track of support and build what we want and oppose what we don't like. So it's stop the machine, create a new world. And we're at the banking conference, which is public banking. That's building what we want. One thing we're going to be talking about tonight is the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That's stopping what we don't want. And so that common framework of two tracks is part of an effort to build a mass movement. And the reason we say mass movement is because there have been research done on what works and what doesn't in the history of change, and it's pretty clear. First off, nonviolent works better than violent. There's no question about that. Over and over again, you can see that nonviolent movements succeed more often than violent movements do. Second, you look at nonviolent movements, what fails and what doesn't. Under nonviolent movements, what succeeds, what fails first is a fringe movement. If you don't become a mass movement, you're not going to succeed. And so, and the way you become a mass movement is first of all a vision that pulls people together. And then the second thing is you want to
develop a strategic framework that is one that people can work together inside of on their own issues toward that broad common objective. So you don't have to drop your agenda. You continue working on your agenda, but realize you're working on a broader agenda, and sometimes at moments you'll create an ad hoc coalition with other folks and join them on a specific action. We're pushing, for example, that people join together in solidarity to stop the Trans-Pacific Partnership. This is an issue that affects everybody. It affects every issue. It empowers finance, it empowers the health insurance industry, the pharmaceutical industry, it empowers all these big corporate interests, the Walmarts, the Monsantos. They're all part of developing this secret trade agreement. They're all on the inside while we're all kept on the outside. So it's an opportunity for solidarity. And if we win this battle, which we will win, in stopping the Trans-Pacific Partnership, it will be a tremendous battle for the people beating transnational corporate power. And from that success, we'll be able to build more. And we'll become more of a mass movement. And you become a mass movement by pulling people from the power structure to your movement. And the power structure includes students or youth, workers, business, media, military, police, religious groups, non-profit organizations, civic groups. There's about 9 pillars that hold the status quo in place. And the way we get stronger is by pulling people from those pillars to our side. And at the same time we're getting stronger, we're pulling people away from the power structure. And so their pillars get weaker. And that's how we build strength. And so that's what our philosophy of popular resistance is. And we want people from all issues that are pushing for these progressive transformational changes to join us in that, so we can build this kind of mass movement while also keeping our individual identities.
So I've heard that, in order to fight the corporate oligarchy, that we really, all the different progressive movements need to come out of our silos and work together. How likely do you think that is, based on your career?
Well, I wear a hat as a historian as well as a political economist. We're in a historical evolutionary period. There's going to be development at different levels, at different speeds in different areas. Worker-owned companies are developing. There's an ecological movement at many different levels, climate change being part of it, the food movement being another part of it, many other pieces of that. Worker co-ops are developing, public banking. These are moving at different paces and are likely to move at different paces. And then there's also a political side of this, where people who are trying to build a political movement often are not really involved in what we're talking about here. They're simply trying to achieve some of the great social goals of liberalism. Whether that all comes together, or how long it takes for that to come together in both movement building, but also politics in general, I think that's what this decade, I think, is all about. And I think it will not be simple. It'll be messy and complex, as all historical processes are, with good intent, with some luck, and with clarity about ideas. Ideas are very important in this. I write books, and and I'm a professor. So people may be surprised to say I don't think ideas matter most of the time, but they do matter sometimes, and they matter when moments when everything is in confusion and people understand that the old ideas don't work. So clarity about direction, which means clarity about ideas, may be particularly important at this moment in history as people search for a common direction. So we'll see. I mean, historical processes are uncertain, but there is a great deal of anger, a great deal of upset. There's going to be a long, ongoing stalemate and decay in the larger system, which forces many, many people to begin to rethink and to begin to act and begin slowly to understand that something big is at stake. So I think this period, the condition and the context that we're entering, is the driving force on the ecological level, on the economic level, on the social level. And that is the cauldron which I think is building the potential of a new movement. So there is a responsibility of everyone to, get serious about this, both about building complex alliances, working through all the difficulties of social involvement. Clarity of ideas is critical, beginning to learn something about where we want to go and think about it. Books, I often say, Chairman Mao said that power grows out of the barrel of a gun. And I think the American women's movement in the 1960s had a better answer. They said, power comes this way. You get half a dozen women together, they read something together, they study it, they talk about it, they figure out what it means, seriously study group, and then they make it into a study action group, and then they support each other figuring out what they can begin to do now locally. And I think that's where power comes from, and I think we need to adopt that, both the study part and the action and the support and the small group part. That's what people can do. Importantly, people are doing it all over the country. So it is, if it's possible in a city like Cleveland, which we talked about earlier, which is a city of great economic poverty and devastation, it's possible to do almost any place. And the resistance is in us, not so much out there. If you can do it in very difficult conditions in many, many parts of the country, there really is no excuse to not rolling up your sleeves and doing it now. And I think a lot of people are realizing that. So it's a very important moment.